Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to this review of the Panzer PZSFL 4C, one of the Tier 5 German tank destroyers. Historically, this is basically a Panzer IV chassis with a dirty grey 88mm gun mounted on the top. And it was designed as an anti-aircraft platform. You know, the German 88 was an anti-aircraft gun. And that was its primary function, and so these sort of side panels and this rear panel all folded down, and the gun clearly had very good gun elevation, such that it could rotate round 360 degrees, track targets, the crew could move around freely on it, etc. It was never designed to engage vehicles. You know, it's an 88mm gun. You could turn it on enemy tanks if it became useful to do so, if it became a necessity. Now, in game, of course, this thing is treated as a tank destroyer. You know, you don't get planes flying around, at least not planes that have anything to do with the outcome of the game flying around in World of Tanks. So this is treated as a tank destroyer, which is not completely unreasonable. As I say, the Germans used the 88mm guns as anti-tank weapons eventually, and one of the earliest instances where they started doing that was in the desert, the African campaign. You know, trying to take out Matildas, they often turned 75 and 88mm anti-aircraft guns round to take out Matildas, because a Matilda was armoured like Fort Knox, and their little Panzer IIs and Panzer IIIs at the time were just not up to the task, but the 88mm gun was. Anyway, what do you get in game? Well, 350 odd hit points is very, par for the course for a Tier 5 tank destroyer. Interesting to note, you have a 400 horsepower engine and a 60 km/h top speed, and you can reach that, especially if you're going downhill a little bit, so this can be a fast little machine. However, caveat time. It weighs 26 tons, meaning that the power to weight ratio is not completely awful, but it's not lightning quick. You know, just bear in mind that its acceleration is not terrible. You know, it's not too shabby, but it's not absolutely fantastic. And the traverse speed may seem good at 48 degrees a second, but you can still be circled by like light tanks and things like that. I will actually talk about the armour now, because unlike as I would usually do, I'm not going to go into Tank Inspector and have a quick look at the armour separately, partly because my antivirus and Tank Inspector are not getting on at the moment, but also because it's a complete waste of time. The armour on this thing is fairly simple. The hull armour on the front might be enough to stop you getting penetrated by a HE round, but basically the actual hull itself, the Panzer IV hull, as I say, might be able to shrug off a HE round, but if it goes into your tracks, again, you might be able to shrug it off. But if anyone shoots you in these giant sides, and in-game these sides do not fold down, if anyone shoots you here with HE, you're going to be in a whole world of hurt, and your crew are going to be having a significant emotional experience. So the armour on this thing is basically trash. If anyone shoots you with AP, it will penetrate unless you get the luck of the gods. And if anyone shoots you with HE, it will probably penetrate unless you get the luck of the gods. That's just how it is. Talk about the guns later. 380 metre view range. Tier 5, yeah, sure, it's fine. It's a fairly tall machine, and it's open-topped. So, you'd expect the view range to be respectable. 550 metre signal range is decidedly uninspiring, but this is only Tier 5, so you can't exactly expect miracles from it. So, I'll just quickly talk about the grind, and then about what sort of machine this is. So this is on the second German tank destroyer line. At Tier 2, you have the Panzer 1. It's a classical tank destroyer, poor armour, mobility isn't fantastic, damn good gun, you want other people to be spotting for you. It's a good little machine. Leading on to the Marder 2, that machine has over the years been nerfed countless times. And again, it is a typical tank destroyer. The gun isn't particularly accurate, but it hits hard. Armour is terrible, mobility is not great. Nah, what are you going to do? Marder 38T, very much a similar deal, but the gun gets considerably better. Or it gets a lot more accurate, let's put it that way, and fires faster. And I've got a full review of that machine up if you're interested, so by all means go and take a look at that, and then you lead up to the Panzer Soufflé 4C. And it plays in a very similar playstyle. I mean, all of these are lightly armoured machines with good guns, and that's basically what the PZSFL 4C is. And that's essentially what this entire tank destroyer line is. Lightly armoured, as I say, no armour, but with good guns. So on that note, let's talk about let's talk about the grind before we talk about the guns, actually, the specific grind on this machine. So, you start off with, do you get that? No, you don't, and, okay, so the only module you'll potentially have unlocked from something else, in fact you will have unlocked if you've got any sense, is this radio here that gives you 550 meter signal range, more than the 400 meter signal range that you get with the stock radio. Everything else is going to be stock on this machine. You can unlock this radio, by the way, on the Marder 2. Everything else is going to be stock. But what does stock mean? Stock, well, you still get a 360 horsepower engine, and you get this 75mm gun, which is, okay, it's not a gun you'd want to be using all the time, but it's not a completely terrible weapon. I mean, it's only slightly worse than the gun on the Stug 3. 15 rounds a minute, 139 pen, 135 average damage, 0.35 accuracy, 1.7 second aiming time. I mean, it's a tier 6 75mm gun. They're all much of a muchness. It's not a bad gun. The L60, it's not a bad gun at all. And it certainly, for the purposes of grinding, will do you perfectly well. Then you unlock this 88mm gun. And if you compare it to the 75, what you'll actually see is that your rate of fire goes down, your average penetration goes down, but only by 7mm. Your alpha damage goes up, your accuracy is the same, your aim time is slightly longer. So the trade-off is pretty much, do you want the increased alpha damage? The trade-off being slightly worse aim time, though still good. Worse rate of fire, slightly worse penetration. That's up to you. And eventually you will unlock this top gun. So we are effectively talking about the guns as we talk about the grind, because this is a tank destroyer. You can't really talk about one without talking about the other. Now, to many people's eyes, this is the money maker. 8 rounds a minute. This is the L74 gun. In your heads, feel free to think of it as the gun mounted on the Tiger. It's not quite, but it's very similar. 8 rounds a minute, 194 average pen. You've basically got 200 average penetration at tier 5 for crying out loud. 240 alpha damage, sniper-like accuracy at 0.32, 2.3 second aiming time. Looks like a damn good gun. Well, yes it is, but this comes with a caveat. There is actually a viable choice of guns on this machine, so discussing the first two to start off with, I would argue the increased alpha damage from the 88mm gun is worth the marginally worse aiming time and the marginally worse penetration. I think, and the worse rate of fire. I think the 88mm gun is the way you want to go once you've unlocked it. So let's just get a shot of that for now. So which is the better gun between these two? Well, it's clearly the tier 8 gun, the L74, right? Well, you say that, but this is where we have to bring in one of the stats that is just not shown in the garage. How wide is your gun arc? So, this is our machine. If we're looking down on it, with either of the first two guns, the 75mm or the shorter 88mm, you get a reasonably wide gun arc off to the sides. With the larger 88mm gun, you get an incredibly narrow gun arc. The sort of gun arc you'll be used to if you've played the French tank destroyers. What does this mean? Well, this means that you often have to move your hull in order to reacquire your target, a lot of the time. And so what you actually find, I'm just going to compare the two 88mm guns, what you often actually find is that despite the fact that the long 88mm gun is more accurate, the worse aiming time is something you feel as you are continually having to move your hull to reacquire your target. So that's a thing to bear in mind. Second thing against this top gun is that it weighs almost 3 tons more, meaning that your tank is not as mobile as it once was. What else is a problem with it? Well, it has really high penetration, which is great, but you have to ask yourself, do you need that really high penetration? Realistically, I mean, this is a tier 5 machine. Realistically, 130 odd pen, as you get on the other 88mm gun with damn good accuracy and aim time, is enough for any tier 5 tank you meet, apart from the AT2, to just auto-aim at it and go through it, basically. AT2 you might have to aim for weak spots. That's from the front. Tier 6 machines, in some cases you might have to aim for weak spots, and Tier 7 you really do want to aim for weak spots. The top gun, the L74, is basically just enough to auto-aim at pretty much anything you will ever meet, but again, you can get bounces on things like the AT2, the AT8, the AT7. But apart from those, you can pretty much auto-aim at whatever you want, which is nice, but a lot of the time, having played this machine, I didn't really feel that the penetration was necessary. And so then what are you left with? Well, it's more accurate. Well, as we've already discussed, it's more accurate when fully aimed, but if you have to keep going through that aiming cycle again, the accuracy isn't necessarily something you're going to actually feel. Okay. What about the alpha damage? Well, the alpha damage is better, 240 compared to 220. But it's not that much better. It's less than a 10% increase. Okay. And you actually suffer for it with rate of fire, so you actually find that the short 88mm gun has a fractionally better DPM than the long 88, and slightly worse alpha damage, but still not too shabby. The point I'm making is that although this seems to be the obvious top gun, the L56 is a viable choice. I would argue it's better than the 75mm gun, but if you're finding the narrow gun traverse really frustrating, and I wouldn't blame you if you were, you might want to just stick with the short 88. Feel free to pack a few rounds of APCR just in case. You know, you get 171 pen with APCR, which isn't too shabby. Might be useful, but it's a viable choice, in my opinion. Now, I've actually got mounted on this the long 88 gun. I'm not going to spend credits mounting the other two, because they don't look massively different. This is the top gun, so to speak, but as I say, you could make a case for the other gun. So the other things you have to grind out clearly is the engine, but this is not a particularly painful grind. You know, in my opinion, you don't find that the stock machine is horrifically worse than the fully upgraded machine, and find yourself wanting to punch things in the face. Ammo loadout, well, with the top gun, I've got a few rounds of APCR, but I don't think I've ever fired a single one of them. Mostly AP. A few rounds of HE isn't too bad, because an 88mm gun at tier 5 is actually quite a large caliber weapon, and so your HE rounds are none too shabby. I mean, you're looking at, with the top gun, you're looking at almost 300 alpha damage, 44 pen, so lightly armoured targets, your HE rounds can do the job, and you know, this add to that the fact this is a fairly mobile machine, and in the late part of the game you can go hunting for things like artillery. Gun traverse speed, don't bother paying any attention to that. I mean, this is a tank destroyer, you have a limited gun traverse arc, how fast it traverses through that arc is pretty much irrelevant. So the play style of this machine is very much your classical tank destroyer. It's made of tissue paper, you do not want to be spotted. You want to be engaging things from a long way away while your allies light them up, spot them. Very stereotypical tank destroyer. And a little bit, you know, it's one of those tank destroyers that sits in a bush, camps in a bush, and people dislike it. Some people throw around insults at tank destroyers like that, in the same way that some people throw around insults at artillery pieces like that. But that's just the way they are intended to be played. Deal. So, I mean, historically, for instance, if you're going to be using something with, well, if you're going to be using anything, you know, you want to be the one who gets the first shot off, you don't want the enemy to spot you. You're not going to sportingly stand there with a giant flag over your head saying, please shoot me, you can go first. Screw that. You want to be in a bush 3 miles away with a damn big gun, nuking it from orbit, because it's the only way to be sure. Alright, so, what equipment and crew skills do you want to use on this thing? Well, consumable-wise, I've just got your standard 3 consumables here. Crew damage is a very real problem with this machine, so a first aid kit's generally a good idea, although you could argue once you start getting shot, you generally start dying very quickly. But, nonetheless, I think the 3 standard consumables is the way to go. Fire extinguisher, you could possibly argue not packing, because I can't remember ever being set on fire in this thing now that I mention it. So maybe you might actually want to invest in chocolate instead of the fire extinguisher, or possibly gasoline to make it go a bit faster. That's up to you. I don't think it's really going to make a massive difference in the end. It depends how much money you're willing to splurge on this thing. Equipment, well, I used my standard grinding equipment on this. What equipment would I recommend? Good question. Kind of depends what sort of setup you decide to go for. I think a gun rammer would be a good choice. Get better DPM. Sorry, pardon me. Better DPM. You're a sneaky tank destroyer. Camo net I would definitely recommend, and I would recommend binocular telescopes, because you're probably going to be sitting still an awful lot. You could argue, if you're mounting the top gun, that with its very narrow gun traverse, you're going to be moving the thing so much that the camo net and binos aren't necessarily useful. You might want to take optics instead of binos, and you might actually, and I very rarely recommend this, you might actually want to take the enhanced gun laying drive just to make the gun aim that little bit faster. I'm not recommending you do that, but it is an option, I guess. I just used my standard grinding equipment, and if you just used kind of the standard TD setup, gun rammer, binos, and camo net, that's not a terrible choice at all. Crew skills. Well, you can see that my crew never made it to 100%. I finished the grind on this machine before they got that far. Also got my mark of excellence on it. Don't be confused. The Germans use 3 stripes to indicate a single mark. So that's not 3 marks, that's 1. Commander, 6th sense, 6th sense, 6th sense, 6th sense. You want 6th sense. Don't argue, just take it. Everybody else, camo. You don't want to get spotted. Anything you can do to avoid getting spotted is a good idea. Repairs is a waste of time. You sit there tracked, use your repair kit, 2 shots and you're probably dead anyway, so don't worry too much about that. So, 6th sense, camo, and you should be pretty much sorted. Is there anything I've missed? Don't think so. As I say, I'm not going to go into the garage. Should just briefly mention though, before we move on, gun depression on this thing is atrocious. It doesn't have any. Gun elevation on it's good. I mean, it's an anti-aircraft gun. That shouldn't come as a surprise, but it used to be that the gun could point straight upwards, but for some unknown reason, Wargaming decided this thing needed the gun elevation nerfed, and so now it kind of points somewhere along here. Anyway, gun elevation's good. Gun depression is utter garbage. So, without further ado, let's go and take a quick look at a couple of games. So, here we are with game number 1. As you can see, we are top tier in this game. We are here on not exactly my favourite map in the game, Hidden Village. This was the map that was introduced along with the Japanese tech tree, but, my own preferences aside, we're gonna try and see what we can do. So, the town, well, since they redid this map, the town is a much more viable option than it used to be. But I'm still not convinced it's the best place to go, and definitely not in a tank destroyer. In fact, I would argue this map is not necessarily the best map for tank destroyers, although I must confess, as time has progressed, I have been finding more and more usable locations on this map if you are playing a tank destroyer. So what are my strengths in this machine? Okay, strengths. Good gun. No, I'm dumb. Weaknesses. Well, it will have a respectable view range being open-topped. Weaknesses. If you get spotted, you're probably going to die. Your armor is terrible. And your camo rating isn't actually all that good. Good point. You're fairly fast in a straight line. Bad point. Yeah, your acceleration isn't the best. So, it's a bit of swings and roundabouts, but essentially you want to turn your engagements into long-range engagements. And so initially, I decided to go back here, hopefully out of the view range of anybody that's likely to spot me. And with any luck, I will be able to pour fire in anybody who is brave enough to poke their nose out around the corner. Now, my gun is more than enough to hurt these fellows. Oh, and if that... Okay, so there's a nice little demonstration. If you are driving around, do not drive in front of a friendly tank, especially a tank destroyer, because they will be trying. If they're stationary and it looks like they're trying. There we go. There was a nice bit of damage. Trying to get some pain on enemy team members. Oh, that was a horrible shot. Because that's how you get below 48% win rate. You are actively detrimental to your team. Your presence on the battlefield is a hindrance to your team. Because there, for example, I could have had one more shot into that 3001H. That 3001H could currently be dead, but no. Tier 3 tank destroyer drove in front of me. I didn't want to take the shot because I didn't want to accidentally kill him. Now, that was a little bit unlucky. My shot sailed right over the top of his tank, that M3 Lee, but I'll put him out of his misery soon, I hope. Do bear in mind, I believe when I played this game I did not have a 100% crew. And there we go, we finish off the M3 Lee. So do bear that in mind. I have a very slim shot at the Hetzer here, but a high damage roll, and I take him out with one shot. And that's actually quite a nice feature of this tank. 240 alpha damage at tier 5 is actually pretty high. And so it means that some lower tier tanks, you stand a chance of one-shotting them, in particular tier 3s, but as you could see there, a high damage roll on a tier 4, and he was dead. So now we slightly relocate. There's this Panzer 3/4 who's coming around to try and make a mess of our T67 friend, but I'm having problems with my gun traverse arc because it's so narrow. In order to reacquire my target, I have to keep moving the hull, I have to keep re-aiming. Shot wasn't completely aimed, takes the Panzer's tracks out, but we managed to kill him in the end for kill number 3. Alas, he also kills our T67 friend, but the scoreline is 10-7, so let's not worry too much about that. We have 3 kills. B1 was never going to be a match for a KV-1S. B1 is barely a match for anything, really. It's such a horrible tank. Anyway, KV-1S armor is not great. Even if it were, I have great penetration, so that took off just over half of his remaining health. He is now a very reliable one-shot for me. So he doesn't really want to poke his nose out again, entirely understandably. But I'm thinking at this moment, Churchill 3's gone down to engage him. Is that going to force him out into the open? Well, Churchill sets him on fire and kills him, and someone's capping our base. Alright, so it's the Panzer 1C, surprise, surprise. So I go back to try and help out our artillery against this guy. Now, Panzer 1C is a threat to me. I have tissue for armor, and that Panzer's machine gun can make a mess. Now, I'm trying to make sure that this shot counts, so I didn't take that shot early. For a tier 5 gun, or a gun on a tier 5 machine, let me correct myself. Now, this gun has a relatively long reload, so you need to try and make your shots count. And we aim, and always, unless you've got a very good reason, always wait for your gun to be fully aimed on this machine. Or stuff like that happens, and it happens quite a lot. It's really frustrating because on paper this gun's quite accurate, but there we go. Anyway, he pokes himself out, sits there for way too long. He really should have come and flanked me or something. He didn't. Panzer 1C dies. So, we should have this game in the bag. We outnumber them. Having said that, the 2 tanks they have remaining are top tier. The 1 tank they have remaining is top tier, but he's on 3 kills. Let's not make this easy for him, because bear in mind, what we have remaining is a low health Churchill 3, me, but I'm a 2-shot kill for him if he loads high explosive, an artillery piece, and a couple of lower tiers. Now, T1 Heavy should still die, but I want to make sure that he dies, and as a result, I'm not just going to conga line in front of him with everybody else one at a time. As I said, the top speed of this machine is actually pretty good, so if you get in a position where you can use that top speed, which is what I'm doing here, and I'm telling my team what I'm doing, use that top speed, get around people's flanks, and actually it means that this tank is relatively good at mopping people up toward the end of the game. Now, T1 Heavy is looking at me with his big fat juicy flank exposed. That is not a good idea. I'm moving, trying to not take any more return fire. I take the risk that he's going to shoot me again, which he does, but I put him out of his misery for kill number 5, and there we go. Now, is there anything I did in that game that I couldn't have done in another tier 5 tank destroyer? Well, I think most of the tier 5 tank destroyers don't have quite that turn of speed, and the 240 alpha damage is nice. But I was playing a very traditional tank destroyer role. Really, the difference there was the alpha damage. Having that 88mm gun means that apart from, I think, the S35CA, and ignoring derp guns for a moment, you've got, by quite a good margin, the highest alpha damage gun at tier 5. And combine that with the high penetration and the good top speed, and you know, you can be effective. But bear in mind, you have a very narrow gun traverse, your aim time isn't the best, the penetration in a tier 5 game is completely wasted, so there are swings and roundabouts. So that was some performance in a tier 5 game. Let's go and have a look at how it performs when the tiering is not quite so generous. here we go. As promised, this is a rather less generous matchmaker. So, there are 3 of us. I'm platooned up with some clanmates. Red Bull, you may have seen in previous videos. Red Bull is here in his M4 Sherman. And Construction, I don't think he's turned up in previous videos yet, but he might have done it. I could be mistaken. Construction is in his Stug 3. Stug 3G specifically, because now they've split it over 2 tiers. Anyway, I've got a review out actually on the Stug 3 not that long ago. I haven't done a review of the M4 Sherman, but I do have a review coming up of the M4 A3E8 Sherman, the Easy 8, the tier 6. So you might find that interesting. Anyway, this is a tier 7 game. It's not the worst matchmaking tier 7 wise that it could be. There's only 2 tier 7s each side, but nonetheless it is a tier 7 game. We are here on Sand River. It's a standard game. Now, first thing you may immediately note, we're initially heading this way, but who's going north? There's currently a very brave tank destroyer, brave, stupid, take your pick, at B7. There's a heavy tank moving up into D4. There's a heavy tank still at our base. Our coverage of the north of this map is very, very poor. And our TOG just shot our own KV2, which is a wonderfully encouraging start. Were those 2 platooned? Yes, they were. Oh, for the love of God, guys. Anyway, so some of our team have made contact with the enemy, but I'm really rather dubious about this, and I decide to go back to the base to try and defend it from the north. Like KV2, who is out there at sort of C5, is not, in my opinion, going to last very long. I don't know. Oh, there we go. Our tank destroyer just came into radio range at A9. He's rather aggressive, but you know, they've pushed fairly far forwards on the north, as in our team have pushed fairly far forwards, but that doesn't mean there's no one there. It just means we haven't found them yet, and there was a Chinu that killed our T67. So far the scoreline is 1 kill apiece. There's also a KV85. I'm telling the KV2 to pull back, so then hopefully I can get a shot on this KV85. Alas, a miss. C'est la vie, it's quite an extreme range shot. So, VK3001P, trying to help our KV2 here, and I track him, and you need to get used to this in this gun. This gun can be so frustrating. It seems to spend a lot of its time tracking people or doing things equally frustrating. Anyway, we managed to get the killing shot on that VK. Shot here on the KV85 actually penetrates, which is nice. You could argue perhaps I should have gone for the Sherman, but there we go. Lining up a shot on the T25. Take off a nice big chunk of his health. But our team appears to be winning this 6 kills to 2, which is fairly nice. And I probably should have changed my fire to the KV1 there, I'll be honest. And I decided to move back a little bit because I don't have 6th sense. T25 there. Take off another chunk of his health. These guys are moving forwards, however, so I'm getting a little bit anxious, and I move back. Now, you will find 6th sense on this machine absolutely invaluable because it is such a fragile tank destroyer, and it's so easy to kill. If you get spotted, people know you have a dangerous gun, they know your health is only 350 because you're only tier 5 tank destroyer, and they know your armor's garbage, so if you get spotted you tend to be focus fired very quickly. Now there's a KV85 there, there's also an IS-2 up there. I'm going to take a little bit of a risk. As I say, I don't have 6th sense, so I'm taking the risk that that IS-2 or that KV85 have not spotted me yet. Trying to get a shot into the side of that IS-2's turret, which I succeed in doing, which is nice, and back the hell off. I do not want to get shot, but I'm popping up in the same place again. This is perhaps a little bit of a mistake. Trying to get the gun depression to get a shot in. No, KV85 was going to shoot me. I decided to see if I can shoot the KV85, but remember that IS-2. T25/2 kills the KV85, and that IS-2 had enough time to aim at me and take me out. And that is, I guess, the lesson of the PZSFL-4C. You are made of tissue. If you try and be more aggressive or cheeky like I was there, I was trying to finish off that KV85. I was being greedy. If you are greedy in this tank, you will die. It's very simple. You know, you have no armor, you have no gun depression, the size of Mount Everest. You can't be cheeky. You have to be very careful when being opportunistic. And I was too cheeky there, too greedy, and it got me killed. Now, other things to take away. I still did over 1,000 damage in that game. It takes 4 or 5 shots and you've done over 1k damage in this tank. So you rack up the damage relatively quickly. So that was still ended up being a respectable performance, and our team go on to win this. But I just wanted to say that you can't be greedy in this tank. You can't push your luck, because most of the time your luck will push back and you will die. So anyway, take a look at the post-battle results, and then we'll jump back to the garage and round things up. Alright, so you've had a quick look at a couple of games. What is my overall verdict on this? I mean, when people first saw that this tank destroyer line was being released, this was one of those that gave people a bit of a start, because it basically mounts the Tiger's gun at tier 5. Tiger is tier 7. Is that overpowered? No. No, it's not. There is so much wrong with this machine that... So it's your archetypal tank destroyer. It basically puts everything into the gun. Now, this machine manages to retain some mobility, quite a lot of mobility actually, but things like the armor is terrible. The camo rating is not actually very good. I mean, the sides don't fold down of this thing. It's a box. I mean, there's a reason it has nicknames like the Death Toaster. It's got a damn good gun, but this is huge, and if people just vaguely cough in its general direction, it will take a shed ton of damage. Its gun depression is woeful. It's very inflexible in how you use it. There's so much working against this. Does that offset the qualities of the gun? I think it does, actually, and I think the Stug 3, 3G I think it is, the other German tier 5 tank destroyer, is, in my opinion, a better, more flexible machine. Not without its problems, but a better machine. I am not going to be keeping this, as maybe some of you will, but a lot of people don't seem to bother. This doesn't seem to be a tank that gets a lot of love. You know, people can seem to do fairly well in it, and with its respectable alpha damage, it can certainly perform, but it can be a little bit of a painful experience, if I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to be keeping it. I can't honestly recommend that anyone else should keep it, but maybe you have fun in it. Maybe you'll really like it and want to keep hold of it. Also, bear in mind, of course, that wargaming over time seem to be gradually making maps worse and worse from a tank destroyer's perspective, and this is very much a classical tank destroyer, so it really does get affected by that. So, yeah, it's not the most painful grind, and it certainly, I think, sets you up well for the rest of the tech line, which is probably going to play out in a very similar manner. I mean, I haven't actually gotten there yet, but by the look of it, the Nashorn is basically a slightly more flexible version of this tank. The Sturret Emil is basically the same thing, but with gun depression and less mobility. Borsig gets a turret, which is one of the defining features of these top 3 tanks, but these are all thinly armoured with terrifying guns. I mean, that's just what they're like. So I'm not going to keep this, but maybe you would want to. It's not the most painful grind in the world, but it's also not particularly outstanding. It's a very run-of-the-mill machine. So there we go. Hope you guys enjoyed that overview. Possibly even found it vaguely informative. If you did, please feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel. And I wish you happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.